All right, next up, we are going to have our session on real estate development. We had a few changes to this session. Let's see, Meredith is unfortunately had to be out of town, so he will not be able to participate in this session. And James Simmons had a family illness that came up last minute that he had to handle, but they both sent their regards, and they said they're already booked for next year, so we'll be seeing them in 2023. But without further ado, let's go ahead and have our panelists step on the stage. So just sit under your picture. Okay, sit under my picture. Yep. All right.
Hello?
We good? Awesome. So thank you guys for being here. We're going to start the real estate development panel. I think first I want to just have our esteemed guests introduce themselves, tell the audience what your company is and what you do, and your title.
Sure. I'm Gina Merritt. My company is Northern Real Estate Urban Ventures. We specialize in affordable housing. I've done about 7,500 units of mostly affordable housing valued at $2 billion and have underwritten over $4 billion worth of transactions.
Hello and good morning. It's good to be back at Columbia. I went here many moons ago, it feels like at this point. But I'm Yarajan Robinson. I go by Raj. I'm a managing director at Goldman Sachs in the Urban Investment Group. We are a social impact investing and lending platform responsible for the firm's Community Reinvestment Act mandate. We're a shop that's been around for a little over 20 years. We've invested and lent over $12 billion of capital for a variety of uses that help low-income families. That's between affordable and mixed-income housing, charter schools, community facility spaces, community serving retail, office, you name it. We've invested and lent across the board in about 20 geographies to date, and that number is growing. A pleasure to be with everyone today.
Awesome. So as we've been talking about for the last few days, I wanted to, again, anchor this conversation with the fact that only 2% of development companies are Black-led, and minority firms only control 1.5% of assets under management. And we have a funder, and we have Dr. Gina, who's at the height of the development game. So we're going to use this time to really figure out how to get the rest of us on level. So let's start with Raj. Can you tell us about the Urban Investment Group? What's the ethos of the group, and what kind of projects are you financing?
Yeah, so as I mentioned briefly, we are a social impact and investing and lending platform within Goldman. If I had to say what our ethos is, it's really about creating impact and helping low and moderate income families in a holistic way. So we do, all types of investing and all types of lending in all types of products. So we invest up and down the capital stack. We do invest anything from pre-development debt to construction debt to bridge lending, you name it on the debt side, outside of long-term, permanent, stabilized debt on already built and leased assets. Because if you're not creating some sort of impact for those low-income families or that low-income community via, CapEx or creating some sort of additional services or extending affordability. If you're not doing something, it doesn't really work with our mandate. So, long-term permanent debt, we don't really do a ton of that. But and on the equity side, and when I say equity, we do JV equity, where there's a market rate risk that justifies equity capital. Traditional equity capital, so we do a lot of that. We also do a lot of tax credit equity investing as well. And so on the JV equity side, not to get too in the weeds, but we'll tend to be 75 to 85% of the capital, with the developer or sponsor being the balance on a 6 to 8 year hold, unless it's opportunity zones, a little longer. But anyways, and then we'll promote the developer upon achieving certain hurdle rates. So typical sort of real estate private equity structure. And then on the tax credit equity side, we do a lot of low-income housing tax credit or LIHTC investing for affordable housing. We do a lot of new markets tax credit investing. We're actually vertically integrated in the sense that we have a community development entity, a CDE. And so we, award allocation to projects that we invest in. We applied in this last round, so knock on wood or whatever material this is. Hopefully we get some this year. We do a lot of historic tax credit equity investing, as well as brownfield tax credit equity investing. So pretty much the full gambit on the equity side.
Awesome. So, and I just want to touch on one thing that we discussed on the call, since we are at DCRE, the Diversity and Commercial Real Estate Conference. I know Goldman has set aside a decent amount of funds for diverse developers and also women entrepreneurs and developers. And if you could talk a little bit about what those funds were set aside for how those funds are allocated, and if we can get any of those funds, potentially.
Yep. So I mean, you hit it on the head, right? Black developers making up, something like 2% of developers in the space is just not good enough. And so Goldman is making a conscious effort to increase our reach to Black sponsors. And I'm certainly, passionate about it myself for, probably obvious reasons. But yeah, so one of the things we did, or at least I did at the end of last year, is I launched a $75 million Black Developers Affordable Housing Initiative fund that's focused on providing LIHTC equity for projects developed by Black developers, or at least a Black principal is driving the decisions of the firm. And concurrently with closing on that fund, we closed on our first investment under it, which was an investment in Rome, Georgia, called South Meadows with Laurel Street, which is run by Dion Nelson, if people are familiar with her. But she's a Black female developer based in North Carolina that has been doing projects in North Georgia and up and down the Appalachian Trail over the last several years. And so we closed on that with something like a $15 million LIHTC equity transaction at the same time. And the reason why that's important is because that initiative is not just focused on Black developers, but more specifically, it's a part of our 1 Million Black Women initiative that Goldman announced, I guess, last year. I feel like with COVID, I lose track of time and space and everything else. But last year, which is a $10 billion firm-wide initiative that was announced by Goldman, aimed at reducing inequities that exist between Black women and the rest of society, and is touching on a lot of aspects of that, be it housing, which this one falls under, being that it's a Black woman-led sponsor, healthcare, education, access to capital. There's a number of pillars that it seeks to focus on, but given the obvious synergies between 1 Million Black Women and its mission and UIG, the Urban Investment Group, and our mission, we're the primary engine within the firm responsible for it. So we're responsible for 70% of that. So $700 million a year, $7 billion total of that capital, and this initiative that I spoke of, the $75 million Black Developers Initiative, over half of the capital in that initiative has to go towards projects led by Black women as part of that initiative. So, and one of which is a project that's led by Dr. Gina here, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yes, I got that money.
So yeah.
Yes, clap for that. So, Dr. Gina, I do want to bring you into the conversation. I know that you already have a relationship with Raj and the Urban Investment Group. Can you talk about how you guys have worked together and how you've built that partnership with Goldman over time?
Sure. It is an interesting story. I was working on a project that I was the development consultant for, and then wound up actually applying for tax credits, and my partner, who was a nonprofit, wasn't financially didn't have the financial capacity to do the deal. So I put myself in as guarantor because I didn't think I was going to win, and I did. So at that time, which was prior to George Floyd's passing, the partner that I had in the deal that was going to provide the construction financing was Capital Impact Partners, right? So before, social impact investing was really a thing, or social justice, Capital Impact was already sponsoring me for this project, which was really surprising. And so I had a tax credit investor that sort of left me hanging. Well, the investor was actually purchased by a larger financing institution, and that new financing institution wouldn't honor the deal. And so they wouldn't provide me with the pre-development capital, and
We would never.
I love it. And so they sort of left me hanging, and I thought, wow, how am I going to recover from this? I'm so deep into this project. I have a 9% award. I don't have any pre-development capital. We wound up getting that capital from the local government agencies, because even at that time, no one would lend us the money, to do the pre-development work. And so I'm searching the landscape to figure out who's going to give me tax credits, right? Because these guys dropped me. And so I started talking to NAHT, right? National Affordable Housing Trust. So they asked me for information on the project. They asked me for my PFS and my corporate financial statements and my project experience, and then really focused on the project and my background, and really never asked me about my balance sheet again, which also was very odd, right? I mean, this is post-George Floyd, but it's still very odd. And so, we're going back and forth, we're negotiating the terms, we're going through all of this, and then they produce a term sheet, and I was expecting it to say NAHT. And instead, in fact, the term sheet was sent to me, and I missed it. 2 days later, my project manager is saying, "Oh, did you see the term sheet?" I'm like, "No." She says, "It's from Goldman." I was like, what the I had no idea that it was Goldman behind this and this fund, and I just said, "Holy cow, I have arrived." Right? I mean, seriously, right? It's the truth. It's the truth. When Goldman gives you that money, I mean, the other money starts to fall out of the sky. It just does. And so I have so many now investors and lenders that want to do my projects, right? When they hear that Goldman really has sort of rubber stamped me, like, yes, we've evaluated Gina and she knows what she's doing, it does go a long way. So yes, I'm so grateful for this relationship. I know that's a long story, but I thought
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. So, as a black woman in the development space, you are, and a doctor at that, you are an anomaly on an anomaly. I just want to hear about some of the challenges you've overcome in starting your firm and gaining financing for deals.
Well, there are a lot of them. You know, for the last 2 decades, I've built an advisory practice, right? So I've done a lot of development projects, really from soup to nuts for other people, other large development organizations, nonprofits, and I essentially did not take development risk because I spent the last 2 decades being a mom, right? Being a mom and a business owner, and taking care of my kids. So I invested, say, over $600,000 in her, you know, but I can't put her on my balance sheet. So, you know, so it has been difficult. In my family, I'm the primary breadwinner. My husband worked for the military, and as we know, this country doesn't really care that much about military people, like vets, like we heard the recent bill that was, you know, shot down. But anyway, they don't get paid enough for the things that they do for us. But he had a high-profile job, and but didn't get paid very much for it. And so I was leading the household, and so I couldn't take development risk, right? I was raising my kid, taking care of my household, you know, and a lot of the developers I worked for and supported and helped actually in this business were men. And, you know, taught a lot of men how to do tax credit deals, right? But those men had wives with good jobs. You know, so they could take the development risk, right? They didn't have to worry about, you know, collecting a check, which is what I had to do, collect a check, pay for private school. You know, and then you spend all of this time, you know, I just had a conversation this week, somebody trying to mansplain me, right? And so it's like, I've been doing this for 27 years, 22 years in my own company. So I know how to do this. I happen to be female, yes. I mean, I love being a girl. You know, so few of that 2%, right? It's probably 15% of that 2% are women, right? Developers. And so it is difficult. It's difficult in terms of that balance. And just now I'm at the point where my child has graduated from the number 12 university in the country, magna cum laude. She's an award-winning writer. And so, thank you. So now I can actually focus on my development career in a different way. I can take development risk. I can, you know, close transactions where I'm the owner. I have $300 million right now in my pipeline where I am the lead developer and owner. Thank you.
Clap for that.
But it's, you know, it's taken two decades to get here. But, you know, I'm not complaining. You know, now's the time. And since Raj is here investing in me, you know, the sky's the limit.
Awesome. So yeah, on the path of us getting to your level, Dr. Gina, Raj, can you talk about, you know, what the minimum deal size you're looking for, and do you work with emerging developers? I'll let you opine on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk generally, and then I'll talk more specifically about, you know, diverse developers because, you know, as I mentioned, we have a real goal of working with more diverse sponsors. So, you know, they're different. So I would say, our group. I mean, I know I mentioned we've been around for a little over 20 years. Not to be too long-winded, but we started out as a pretty small shop, less than 10 people, doing just the JV equity investing that I mentioned before, and mixed income projects that may have a little mixed use aspect to them, like retail on the ground floor or something like that. So we were doing a couple of deals a year, call it, no more than $100 million a year in investing. This is back in 2001, 2, 3. So fast forward to 2008, the financial crisis, Goldman became a bank and subject to the Community Reinvestment Act, which requires banks to invest in underserved areas where they do business. And it was a pretty natural transition for our group to take over that mandate. And so we did. And since then, we've grown a lot. So we went from a less than 10-person team to today, we're probably about 45 people or so, doing $100 million then to just this past year, we did $3 billion in investing in lending. And so we've done, a little over $12 billion total, probably closer to 13 today. And we did $3 billion last year. So that just gives you some, I guess gives you a sense of how much we've scaled up in the last, 10 plus years. And I say all that to say that we're growing more. And so we're targeting a little over $3 billion this year, $3.5 billion next year, and the number keeps growing. But the personnel is not growing at the same pace as the numbers. So, so how do you do that without creating more than 24 hours in the day? Is you do bigger deals, right? And so, 10 years ago we were doing probably our minimum deal size was. Well, no, let's say like 4 or 5 years ago, our minimum deal size was on average, was about $10 million. Today, for non-diverse sponsors, we're generally looking to put out at least $30 to $35 million of capital, just given the amount of transactions we're seeking to do per year and the scale that we're seeking to achieve. And when I say 30 to 35 million, I'm talking about across the capital stack. And so I mentioned we invest in all types of debt and all types of equity products, including tax credit equity. But what I didn't touch on is that we often do it in the same transaction, and happy to talk more about real life examples of that at any point. But so we might be the construction debt on a transaction, as well as the JV equity, the LIHTC equity, the brownfield equity, all on the same transaction, because once we're in and comfortable, we're totally in, and we're fine being on in multiple pieces and dealing with that potential conflict, if you will. And so that 30 to 35 is across the capital stack. Diverse sponsors is a little different, and it just depends on. It's all circumstantial, right? But I will say that we often go smaller than 30, as small as 10, and sometimes smaller than that as well, when it comes to diverse sponsorship, because our goal is to really work with more and build those diverse sponsors so that they're doing $1 to $300 million deals, right? That's our goal when we see stars in the business like Gina, is to work with them and then be a part of them doing the $300 million of deals that she's talking about, and like that next deal being $100 million, the next deal being $150 million, and so on and so forth. So one of the guys that isn't here today that was touched on earlier, Meredith is with BRP Companies. I'm sure a lot of you guys know them, but we started working with them 15 years ago, back in 2007, when they were doing 10 to 20 unit developments, $15, $20 million, maybe something like that, if that. I'm the main lead investor responsible for that relationship, and so I work with them a lot, and they're definitely not doing 10 and 20 unit deals nowadays. The last deal I closed with them was the end of last year in New Rochelle. It was probably about a $350 million deal, over 500 units, with some community facility space and commercial space, and we did the debt on that, and the brownfield equity and the JV equity and the LIHTC equity on that deal. So we were about $250 million in on that, and then sold down some participations, but that's in the weeds. But but yeah, and then the deal before that was another $350 million deal earlier in the year last year in Jamaica, Queens. Well, we brought in one of our client relationships. It was an opportunity zone deal, but we're managing all of that capital, which is over $200 million of capital invested into that deal as well, and we co-invested. So I say it to say that that's what we want to do more and more of. We want to and are willing to work with diverse sponsors on smaller transactions and help them grow to scale.
Can I jump in?
Go for it.
So it's interesting, this term, emerging developers. In my case, lots of folks like to call me that, right? I mean, again, I've been doing this for 27 years, 22 years on my own company, but I haven't been an owner, right? And so, most of the projects that I do, are between, say, 70 and 150 unit deals. So I haven't really done many, if any, 10, 20 unit deals. I started, when I first started in this business working for a company, my first deal was 4%, 9%, twin, we call them now, 300 units. And so I've always had experience in doing very large deals. And so when I was ready to sort of do my own thing, it still is a challenge, right, to start with doing a 100-unit deal and expecting investors to invest in you, right, when you spent all your money on your kid, right, and you don't have a huge balance sheet to show for it. And so this deal that Raj is invested in is a small deal, just as painful, though, right? It's just as painful as the...
It's good pain, good pain.
As the 100-unit deal. So for me, the way I'm trying to get financing these days really is I'm trying to leverage the fact that I've been doing this for a long time and I've been doing very large deals and, hoping that people will continue to invest in me at this 100-unit level because, yes, as we know, it's the same amount of brain damage, but you make a lot less money, right? The other interesting thing about being an emerging developer, right, is all of the programs that are out there now for developers of sort of any size or scale or age range, right, in terms of the age of your company. So there are programs like Capital Impact Partners in the DMV. They offer all kinds of programs for different levels of developers, right? They have an equitable development initiative where you can be really young in your career, and they provide you with access to capital and resources. There's a new program that Amazon is invested in called Housing Equity Accelerator Fellowship, where they give the sponsors money for project-specific capital. And then actually I'm in another program called Wells Fargo, the Growing Diverse Housing Developers. And this is for companies that are very seasoned that need enterprise-level investment, right? And so that's where I am now as a developer, right? I have 22 years of experience on my own, and what I really need is, I need a project accountant. I need a full-time CPA. I really need a CFO. I need senior-level executives in my company in order to really to execute on the $300 million of pipeline projects. And yes, one day, soon, I want my own $150 million project, and I will be going to see Raj. I will. He said it. But and so for me, I don't like to use that term, emerging. People continue to use that with me. I mean, I'm emerging in terms of the use of my own balance sheet, but obviously not emerging in terms of the more than 2 decades of experience. And so certainly for women who have had a lot more challenges getting into this space and growing their businesses, you should definitely look, in this space in terms of CDFIs. If you're 3 years in, 5 years in, 7 years in, I think Raj's platform definitely helps seasoned developers who are trying to be owners actually get the financing that they need. So his program is awesome, and there's a bunch of others out there that you all should be checking into.
Awesome.
So-
I'm gone.
Sorry, I mean to steal the shine, but just to put a little more specificity on some of the things we try to do to help. Obviously I touched on doing deals that are smaller than what we would typically look at, given the resources, because like Gina mentioned, that $15 million deal is often the same, if not more, work than the $80 million deal. It's no less work. But we're willing to do that. But another thing we do is, we'll put extra protections in place to help mitigate it and get the firm as a whole comfortable with what might be perceived as additional risk. And so, like, maybe there's additional oversight that we do on the construction side, and we may say, okay, we'll contribute towards that, or we'll cover that. We'll put extra eyes on it than what we might put on a standard project. If it's a tax credit deal, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but maybe we pay just a little bit more and have some extra contingency in the transaction, so that instead of the typical 5%, there's 10% there, and maybe that gets folks comfortable internally to do deals that we might not otherwise do. And so again, I mean, it really is important for us to establish more relationships. So I encourage everybody that is emerging, to use that word, as a developer, to consider us, because we are trying to do our part to increase diverse sponsorship.
I'm going to say one more thing. Yes, Raj sort of helps support the balance sheet in your projects when you don't have one. And that was the whole point of the relationship between NAHT and Goldman, was to find those developers who have the expertise, but that don't have the millions of dollars in liquidity that it takes to do these deals. And so their fund basically sort of undergirds your project in terms of the balance sheet. So it's a very, very powerful thing, because there's no way I know that I could get a Goldman to look at me if they're going to measure my balance sheet against the next developer with equal level of experience that's been an owner all this time. So without this fund, I really wouldn't be doing that deal. So.
Awesome. So you mentioned Meredith, who a lot of us have read about or have met through DCRE. And I think Dr. Gina can attest as well. Raj is a good friend to have. So I think in the call before, we talked a little bit about relationships and how you want to build relationships with developers over time, so then you can then come back and fund their second and third and fourth deal and grow with them. I think it would be good to tell us what we should be thinking about when we're trying to build a relationship with the urban investment group, or get that first deal, and what should developers be thinking about when they're looking for their second and third?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, with us, I think the way I would approach it is, it's all about resources, right? So we want to have repeat partners in UIG and at Goldman broadly, to be honest. And so we don't want to do one-offs. And so if we're working with a new partner, there's more resources that have to be put. When I say resources, people's time, because that's the value at our shop, is people's time and effort and energy, because it's a finite amount of it. And so new sponsors and new geographies too, but new sponsors require increased resources and efforts, and so the internally, what a lot of our partners or clients don't see is that internal exchange and back and forth, and us on the investing team convincing the firm, given its controls, that this is worth the resources to put into it. Like, we should do this, and this is why we should do this. And it's not purely like a P&L thing. It's all the time, right? So, one reason, obviously, is we've been talking about is diverse sponsorship, but it needs to be more than that. So, how passionate is this person about the space? Do they have? You don't necessarily have to have the 22 years with your own shop like Gina, but Gina's clearly passionate about the space and dedicated to the space, and is looking to be in it long term, looking to develop a relationship with us, and it's obvious that it's not just words in like what she's been doing. And so as long as you are, you have to show, at least with us, you have to show that sort of commitment. Like, this is what I've done. My goal is this. This is my vision. I've been talking with X, Y, and Z about this project, that project, so that we see that it's a long-term relationship that you're seeking. And so it's worth investing that R&D, if you will, up front, so that we establish a certain rapport. And the next deal is much easier, and it's usually bigger, right? Like, everyone knows, as a developer, you want to go bigger and bigger and bigger, as you do more deals, which only makes sense. And so it's a win-win for us. We're now doing bigger deals with you. There's a certain level of trust and rapport. We've gotten over the initial humps in the road, if you will. From an execution perspective, it becomes a lot easier. And so having that, showing that up front, and why that is, and making it easier for us to convince everyone internally to put the resources into it, is how I would approach it.
And I'd like to piggyback on that. Raj's team spends a lot of time with me. We talk. We have weekly closing calls now, but outside of that, the team still, they schedule calls with me all the time to talk about different aspects of the deal. They're very involved. It's just a lot of people that they will throw at a deal, which to me is a big deal, right? They are making that huge investment, getting to learn more about me, my project, the way I work, and we've already gotten term sheets from Raj on 2 other projects, which together will be a little more than 200 units, also a 4% and a 9%. Those are sort of behind there. In the entitlement phase, this one project we're doing now is closing, so certainly he'll see, what our capacity is to execute in real time here shortly. But then we have he's again serious about the relationship, serious enough to look at 2 other deals that are further behind in the pipeline, and provided term sheets for that as we move forward with entitlements, on those projects. So what he's saying is the truth, because I'm experiencing it right now.
Awesome. So I have so many other questions I'd like to ask, but we're running short on time. I want to give the audience a chance to ask any questions that might be out there.
Oh, hold on. I'll come. Okay. I got it. Okay. Hi, Dr. Gina. I read your story this week in the Washington Business Journal, and I've been trying to track you down. I left you a voicemail. Okay. So I grew up in a...
You found her.
I grew up around construction sites all my life. My mother is a developer in Africa. And the older I get, the more I gravitate towards real estate. I'm an agent right now, commercial. But how does a woman get started? I mean, you're like probably the only role model I know in DC. I live in DC, so can you give us some advice?
Sure. I actually came from an MIS background, right, which is very technical, and then I went to business school and really studied operations and finance. And I would say, for all developers, I think, especially women, really, because of how we have to prove ourselves every day, that technical proficiency around underwriting and running financial models is critical. I mean, being in construction, that is an exceptional skill. But in order to get a deal done from soup to nuts, you really have to know how to run a financial model. I tell everyone that all the time. I'm a mentor in a variety of programs. I've done a lot of training on financial modeling. It is the key skill, I believe, to being a developer. You got to know how to structure your transaction. You got to know where the money is. You have to be able to create a budget that you can live with and that you can get through to get your deal done, right, without a lot of what I call budget busts. And the only way to do that is, one, through experience. I would say working for someone else doing this, and then two, really understanding how to do financial modeling for your projects. And I will talk to you after this, okay? So you don't have to chase me. I'm sorry.
Oh, good morning. I'm Lucinta Lewis Ellis from Columbia, South Carolina again. I'm a general contractor and now developer, but you just answered my question because I wanted to know, really from a development standpoint, what's the most critical or crucial part of it? And the financial piece is, got to know your numbers, right? Does it make sense? Is it feasible? But also, do you bring in a team of consultants, or I heard you say you're a consultant, but to handle the different parts and pieces of putting that development project together, even from site selection to, just the whole gamut.
I actually do everything, soup to
Okay.
nuts. I was trained by an organization in DC that essentially had billions of dollars and really was a construction and investment company. They started a development company. They hired me. I was the sixth person there. They gave me these two projects and just said, go do them. And so I had to figure that out. But the fact is, yes, I do every single part of the transaction. I can do it from soup to nuts. And I think that's an important experience to have. Even when I'm hiring people now and they want a lot of money, the first thing I ask them is, have you ever built anything from soup to nuts? And then it's like deer in headlights. Okay, then you can't make that kind of money. And if somebody's going to invest in you, really as an investor, they want to know that you know how to execute. So so the first thing I also like to tell people is, go work for a developer. Go work for a developer for a couple of years. Especially emerging developers can use the help. Right? They can't pay you a ton of money, but you'll get an amazing experience because you don't have 50 people doing a project. You've got, one or two people running the whole thing. You can get a great experience, and then years later, do your own thing. In fact, what I'm doing now, and what I've been doing for a decade, is helping Black women in the development space. I hire them all the time. I work with them as consultants, because I feel like, especially as a woman, if we don't do it for each other, it ain't gonna happen.
Good morning. Dr. Merritt, I did just that. After 10 years of running my own company, I went and humbled myself and started working for another firm to do that, to transition in from multifamily to commercial.
Smart.
But my question to you, Raj, is about scaling. So I was able to win a 250-unit award in Pittsburgh, neighborhood I grew up in, buttressing right up against downtown Pittsburgh, very prime, and it's in partnership with the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's good to know that those resources that you all provide are there, but can you talk a bit about how you also help small emerging developers to scale?
Yeah, I mean, some of it I've touched on a bit in and that's great. Congratulations on securing that site. That's great. I think, with us, the devil's in the details a bit, but there are certain programs that are out there through NAHT and LIF and Capital Impact Partners that Gina was talking about. That's more on the pre-development equity side, which is often, at least in my experience, often like a big gating issue with just getting to construction closing, that part, the millions that it often takes, certainly for a project of that scale, 250 units. We don't necessarily play in that space, but we have relationships with those partners, often nonprofits that do, and there are a number of programs out there targeting diverse sponsors. So I would say go that route, and I can certainly try to be helpful in that route. We do stuff in the pre-development space as well. We try to be creative there, the same way I mentioned before, with ways to create additional contingency on deals for partners that don't quite have the level of experience that we're necessarily accustomed to. But like pre-development, we don't do pre-development working capital, but let's say, for instance, just throwing something out there, let's say you own a piece of land or something like that, and it's going to take you 2 years to get through pre-development. Or more, especially if there's like subsidies involved and like the public-private kind of stuff. We might say, okay, well, we'll give you a loan of XYZ LTV at a pretty attractive relative to the risk interest rate, knowing full well that a lot of that is for you to build staff and build capacity, hire the right people, which can be expensive, as Gina just talked about, especially nowadays. So we can try to be creative in those ways, because we do recognize that that's a lot of the heavy lifting that goes into actually making these deals real, and then we try to continue to be innovative and stretch in ways that we might not necessarily stretch on a non-diverse deal, in order to make sure that we can, do what the ultimate goal is, which is, get you the money, right? So.
All right, we have one more question.
Hi, good morning. So I'm a market rate investor, so I operate at all points within the risk spectrum, core all the way to opportunistic, including development. First, it's kind of two-part question. First question is, does your group, Raj, work with market rate developers, and not necessarily on urban product, but also suburban product? And then the second part to that question is, there are definitely a lot of programs out there. Amazon, right, you mentioned, Dr. Merritt, that's focused on emerging, I like to consider it as economically emerging demographics, but emerging investors, emerging developers, if you will. But those are all geared towards affordable. Are there any that either of you are aware of that are inclusive of market rate investors?
Well, I guess I'll respond in order. On the do we invest in market rate product, the answer is yes, with caveats. We do, a lot of market rate investing, but we are generally not going to do, fully market rate condos in Soho, or market rate rentals in a upper income census tract or neighborhood, just because there are other sleeves at Goldman that do that sit on the same floor as me. But that's not our mission. Our mission is to help low and moderate income families, and that doesn't mean exclusively, but that means in some way, and at least partially, most of the time, And so without getting into too much of the weeds, we have a number of funds with our long-standing partners. Like once we played in the playpen together a couple times, and there's a certain rapport, we can be pretty flexible. And so we have funds that are, let's say it could be a $100 or $200 million JV equity fund, as long as the majority of that capital is touching on the sorts of things that we generally touch on. We can be creative about allowing the minority, so 49% or less of the capital, not touch on that. But we're only doing that with partners that we've done some deals with, a certain level of rapport, and that partner generally is mission aligned, meaning not just purely, seeking profit, but also seeking to, help these, communities in some way. But you have to make money, so we get that too, and so we do some fully 100% market rate deals with partners that do a lot of the sort of deals that we normally would do, but also do market rate. So they're pretty diverse partners. But in terms of on the fully market rate side, our business doesn't deal with a lot of developers that are just purely market rate, because they would just go to some other part of the sleeve. I don't know if, Gina, I don't know if you know of programs that are purely market rate driven, but the short of it, clearly I don't know the full answer to that, but I imagine there must be, but I honestly don't. Just because if you're not touching, on something that's helping those communities in some sort of way, at least in some of your projects, you're probably talking to another part of our shop than the Urban Investment Group in terms of your primary contact. So I couldn't answer.
So that is the close of our development panel. Can you guys thank our guests?
All right, that was very informative. All right, so we have a 15-minute break. Make sure to network, meet somebody new.